The clue is in the words, long term. Takes a long time. Now, unfortunately, these particular letters often get reduced down to like LTPD, or if you're using athlete instead of player, LTAD at times. And by reducing it just to letters, I think it devalues the process, makes it sound very easy. Also becomes synonymous with particular frameworks. And you need to think of long-term player development really just as a guide, a framework of what really happens to humans over the first sort of 2.5 decades of life. And we go through various phases as we move from being a baby through to an infant, to a young child, on into an adolescent, and then on into young adulthood and beyond. We've all gone through those phases in this room. The thing that differentiates each one of us is the speed at which we go through those phases and the magnitude of change that we each experience. And you don't need someone like me to tell you that we're all different shapes and sizes and heights. Some of us have no hair, some of us have some hair. We have different colored eyes. So there's a degree of individualization in this. And for some reason, over the last 2 to 3 decades, with increasing speed of interference, we are changing the nature of our children's and youth lives when it comes to sport. Interestingly, the arts, academia hasn't changed. They still get it. They still understand that you go to grade school and it takes 12 years. And grade 1 does not look like grade 12. Even the average parent understands that, and yet they completely break the rules when it comes to sport. So, what am I going to talk about? My task is just to provide an overview of several other talks that will happen over the next day and the panel discussions around this whole area. You're going to hear a little bit more sort of concise information from others as to the type of programs they're actually putting into place. I'm going to give you sort of a 75,000-foot overview. I apologize for any slides you've seen before, but anyone like me that talks on this subject worldwide across a number of different domains, from the arts to science, academia to industry to sport, is going to show the same stuff because we're human, and this is what happens to humans, regardless of what we're doing with them, regardless of the program we're superimposing on youngsters. Because this is development, and biology doesn't give a damn about the programs you run. You can either work with it and, if you like, springboard off certain phases of opportunity, periods of sensitivity, or you can try to fight them. So I'm going to talk a little bit of background stuff. I'm going to give you some information. We're going to talk a bit about the role of competition. Don't let anyone tell you that competition is not important. Of course it's important. It's just, what does it look like for a 6- and 7-year-old who's starting to play hockey compared to 12 years of age, 16 years of age, through to the professional leagues? Competition has a very distinct purpose in learning and experience. It's the final exam, if you like, of what they're learning, just like in school. But school understands that you have midterms and pop quizzes en route to a final exam. And they certainly don't give you the final exam right at the start of the season. Then I'm going to give a little bit of my personal commentary because I'm very opinionated on the subject, because I'm so frustrated. I don't make my living out of talking on this subject, actually. I'm very focused on high performance. That's what I spent the last 4 Olympic cycles dealing with in Canada and their winter sports. But anyone that works with high performance understands this process. It's just unfortunate that that knowledge level is up there and it's not in the hands of the average volunteer coach, and it's certainly not in the hands of parents. I don't like the phrase parent education. I think you have to get into the game of parent information. I don't think there's an adult on the planet that really likes to be force-fed with education. I think you have to have your FAQ, your frequently asked questions sheet, for each age group you're dealing with. And one of your responsibilities as an age group coach, the hardest job on the planet when it comes to children, is to make sure that you can answer the questions of the parents, because they're bus drivers and plumbers and physicians and lawyers. Very few of them will have a specialism in growth and development of youngsters, so you can't expect them to know. And they are constantly being bombarded with information that is sending them down a wrong street, a wrong alleyway, because there's a machine out there that doesn't actually care about children and youth. Completely misguided. So, you have to approach this with an open mind, because I don't give a damn what kind of bias you have. I don't care how narrow your comfort zone is. And unfortunately for all of us, our comfort zone gets narrower and narrower as we age. We can't help it. That's just human nature. We become more and more resistive to change. We talk about lifelong learning, but it's a crock, because you have to make a choice and put effort into that. And the vast majority of us don't. And people that call themselves an expert, usually that means there is an exclamation mark and an underline of that particular name, and it means they've stopped learning. I'm now an expert. I know it all. Bullshit. I drive to work every day. Well, not every day. I drive periodically into the offices. But every time I do, I realize the gap between what I know and what I don't know just gets wider and wider, and not in my favor. That's the reality. That's the reality. And it's with that daunting task that I approach this subject. Now, 3 things that are a problem for us when it comes to athlete development and putting in place a framework that is at least evidence-based as well as experience-based for children and youth. The worst thing, unfortunately, is most of us are ignorant around what the hell we're doing. We haven't been taught. That's the first thing. Why? We don't see children's sport on TV. We don't see the whole curve. We don't understand. What should a 5-year-old be able to do if I throw them a tennis ball? Here's the tennis ball. Knock yourself out. Show me what you can do with that. The average parent has no clue. None of us do. Who's a kid that's a bit ahead of the curve? Who's average and who's a bit behind the curve at that moment in time, 5 years? What should a 10-year-old to do if I kick them a soccer ball? If I hand a pair of skates to a 15-year-old who's had some experience with ice skating, what should they be able to do on ice? No one has any idea, because no one sees it. And to be quite blunt, most parents typically only see a few sports on television, largely male. Don't see that much female sport on TV, certainly not of the nature of hockey. So we're ignorant. So that's the first step. The next one is most of us are quite stupid when it comes to hockey. We are. We make stupid decisions all the time. Here's a good one for you. Could you imagine if I'm the parent of a 9-year-old who I sign up for hockey, okay? They go to hockey in September, and there's a tryout to make the team. And whether the kid is good enough or not determines whether the kid plays hockey that season. Well, can you imagine if that same parent turns up at school with their child in tow, the child signed up for history that semester, and they give the kid a history exam, and if the kid fails the exam, they don't get to do history that semester. You understand what I'm saying? And yet we do that all the time in age group team sports. If you're good enough, at the start of the season, before we've taught you anything, we're going to teach you even more stuff. But if you're crap, you can't actually play anymore. Which leads to this. And Tom talked about it earlier. That's the immoral bit, where we actually knowingly do bullshit stuff with kids. We do completely the wrong thing. because we don't treat it as being their lives. It's adults. Whether it's a coach who has a distorted value set and it becomes all about winning, whether it's a parent who's completely mindless and thinks that get them in early, specialize. It's important to understand the difference between some of these terms that we're using in the popular press, like specialization. What that really means is we train systematically in one area. That's not quite the same as specialization. And we talk about talent ID when what we really mean is we identify maturation early, because we're certainly not identifying talent. And for the true outliers, they're so far off the normal curve, you'd spot them anyway. So, those three things: ignorance, stupidity, and immoral behavior when it comes to children. And I'm sorry to hit you over the head, but these are exactly the points that Tom said to you, but with nicer language than me. But I only get to talk to you for 45 minutes, and I'm not prepared to waste your time or mine. Because you either listen or you won't. You have a choice. It's like coaching. You have a choice to coach or you don't. We're going to talk about leadership tomorrow. Leadership is all about a choice. You can choose to lead or you can choose to follow. Pretty simple. And for those of you in the room that are interested in performance, it's exactly the same about performance. Because the vast majority of people that say they're interested in performance talk themselves out of performance most of the time. So this is what we're talking about. This is the journey. If we're lucky, 70 to 80 years on the planet. Okay? Those are the phases. And you'll notice by those silhouettes immediately that the ones to the left of the diagram do not look like the middle. The athletic senior, the athletic adult. They're little children. They have different spatial awareness, different balance capabilities, don't understand necessarily pressure sensitivity, at least before the age of 10. They haven't even laid down the foundation of rhythm before the age of 8. And here we have a sport that is reliant upon a fundamental skill, skating, and we rarely actually teach the damn thing. They have to somehow pick it up through osmosis. Kind of weird. And here's the other thing. Hockey is hockey. Ball hockey, street hockey, floor hockey, field hockey. They're all the same. That's why you can teach anything to do with tactics and arguably most techniques, even just by pushing the chairs away in this room right here or in the car park. And yet we always say we don't have enough ice time. Well, you can preserve that valuable ice time if you bother to teach tactics away from the ice surface. And then when you get on the ice surface, the kids know roughly what they've got to do, assuming that they're the age that's capable of learning that type of stuff. And you're not trying to teach the Pittsburgh Penguins defensive system to a bunch of 6-year-olds. So we have childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, and then finally adulthood. These are 4 distinctive type phases. And in the scientific literature, they will have very, very distinct connotations and expectations around each of those. And they may use slightly different language to the ones I'm using. I'm just trying to give you a sort of Cole's Notes version, an overview of the system. It is a very complex process. Don't expect everyone to understand absolutely everything about it. I don't know if there is someone that actually does. What you have to be able to understand is, what does the dashboard look like for each of those phases? What should be on the dashboard around athleticism and player development for the youngest age groups? Because that dashboard looks fundamentally different than it will do for the young adult. Surely we all understand that. You all drive cars. There's a lot of shit going on under the hood of your car. But all you really need to know is how fast the thing's going, is it overheating, and how much gas do you have in the car. Now, occasionally on a modern car, you can switch and toggle the dashboard, and it can tell you some other stuff. But it tells you fundamentally the main things you have to concentrate on. So what are the main things you have to concentrate on from 5 to 8 years of age? What really are the things that are important? Remembering that the hallmark of great age group coaching is to get the child The youth ready for the next phase of their lives, because it's their lives, not yours. So you're getting that 8-year-old ready to be 9. You're getting that 11-year-old ready to be 12. You're getting that 15-year-old ready to be 16. In other words, your job as an age group coach is to get ready to hand them off to the next phase. And if you're working in a large, complex club system, hopefully you've got vertical and horizontal communication. So the coaches working in the ages before you know exactly the expectations of what you're expecting for entry into your phase. And then what are you going to be doing with that youngster as you take them through the 1-2 years that you might have them, and what you're handing them off to. That's people that understand the purpose of age group coaching. And as Tom said, what does the component around the environment that you create? Because you have total control of that. You may not have great facilities. You may not have great resources at your disposal, but you still create the environment. The positivism. The fact that error can be made. Although it's arguable that they're making error, they may not just be executing to the highest level. After all, they're beginners. They're juniors, they're youngsters, they're learning. So they're not going to get it right. Something parents also don't necessarily understand. So I'm going to start to show you some quick, boring stuff. You may have seen all this before. I'm just trying to provide you with some information because you need to leave me, in this 45 minutes, with some level of understanding of what goes on with these children. Because hopefully then you will ask the right questions about the programs that you're designing. So, first 2 decades of life along the horizontal axis, you have a percentage scale on the vertical scale where 100% is the adult final state. Okay, and on this graph, you have an approximation of the neural development curve in humans, aka brain size, brain weight, the hardwiring of the information system, almost the internet of the body, if you like. The nervous system is how the body communicates. Okay, and you can see it develops its capacity very quick. And if you were to look physically, you'd understand this. You understand that babies and youngsters, up until about 10, 11, 12, 13, their heads are certainly out of proportion. They're larger than they will be as an adult, because the body is responding to all these stimuli coming in and the brain is expanding, that central processing unit. And then gradually, the brain will cull those information highways that it doesn't often use. Okay, so you see that flattening. Does that mean that brain and neural development is over? No, not at all. We can develop new connectivity, new synapses throughout our life. It's just the greatest degree of plasticity and change happens in that first decade, decade and a half. This alone, just that one line, should scream at you, and I mean scream at you, that you expose children during this phase of their lives to as many different stimuli as possible. As many different stimuli as possible, because you want that brain to expand its information highway to the greatest possible extent, because this is a huge, huge period of sensitivity for that. Can you make it up later? Not to the same degree as if you had managed to do a multitude of different factors early on. But you can definitely teach an old dog new tricks if you have the patience, but no one does later on. Compared to this line. Now, this is the line that everyone gets gets excited about, because this is the hormonal endocrinological sort of advancement. In this case, this is a rough approximation of the circulating levels of the male sex hormone testosterone, present in both males and females, obviously in a higher degree in males. This is largely one of the signaling mechanisms, upstream and downstream, for many of the changes that take place with puberty. So you can see where the upswing is. And of course, you're not going to get any hypertrophy, so massive muscle development, until that upswing. So no point doing massive amounts of weight training of a classic nature or resistance training with prepubescence. Do not mistake. You got me back on? Yes? Okay, back to this. So this is important because if I were to show you, hey guys, come on. Thank you very much. This line, the overall sigmoidal curve, you can see that in the first few years, the steepness of the light blue line, fairly significant. There's a relatively flat stage in the middle, and then all hell breaks loose as they go through puberty, right? This is important because if you think of it this way, you can see in the first sort of 12 to 14 years of age, there's a very clear message here. Neural development. Kids have a massive ability to learn things, okay? Compared to post-puberty, where we see the more traditional aspects to do with training. And particularly as I'm going to show you high-intensity type work and the aspects to do with the energy systems that are important for adults playing the game because they're vastly different than prior to the age of 14. Kids before puberty are not even developing energy in the same way that the adults will. Okay? So, that's important. This is just broad terms. Oh, there we go. Broad terms for you. So this, over the first 2 decades of life, should suggest to you a sequencing of training. Lots of different things. Teach them as many movement skills as possible. For God's sake, teach them to skate, not simply forwards and backwards, side to side, inside edge, outside edge, non-dominant foot, not dominant foot, getting up off the ice off their back, their front. First 2 strides, all these type of things. Teach them to skate, be totally comfortable skating under any circumstances, with lots of people around them, compared to just simply open ice. Understand how to skate as fast as possible, right next to the boards. Not be frightened of the boards. Can you turn in both directions? I'm fed up with watching the NHL and watching players that can only turn one way effectively. And typically, when they're protecting the puck on the inside of their blade of the stick. So I'm right-handed, so that means when I'm turning left, pushing off my dominant foot, keeping the puck on the inside of the blade. I'm not so good coming the other way. Why? Because when they were kids, they only practiced what they were good at. Classic Rudy Giuliani stuff. Weddings discretionary, funerals mandatory. We'll talk about that tomorrow in leadership. Okay, you've probably seen this type of stuff. Height in change in a year. So anything on this graph is improving quite dramatically, okay? Up at the top, about 15 centimeters a year. Middle, about 7 centimeters, 5 centimeters a year. Down the bottom, 1 centimeter a year. First 2 decades. Here's North American girls. It's very similar for Europeans. Maybe not the magnitude of change. Largely to do with environment and diet. A lot of growth in the first couple of years, relative stability until the growth spurt. Then you see the peak come in, and then it gradually slows until the adult height, right? And you don't need me to tell you that. You know girls are going to grow somewhere about 11 through to 13 years of age, plus or minus a year, right? You also know if I show you North American boys, same for European boys, Scandinavian boys, that the boys grow later. They grow later. But they end up taller. Why? Because they have a longer growth spurt, and they grow at a greater rate during the growth spurt, so they end up taller. With me? Yep. Didn't need me to tell you that. Tall. These 2 dotted lines now tell you the aspect to do with bone mineral density, because the problem is when the bones grow lengthwise first, they're quite brittle. If I ripped out a femur of a boy at this point, right at the top there, that's peak height velocity, about 14 years of age for males, okay? Right up there. we ripped the femur out, turned it on its end, cut inside, looked inside. The trabecular bone, okay, the honeycomb bone that gives it its actual tensile strength, not very well developed yet, because the bones grow lengthwise first. The growth plates close to stop the bone growing any further lengthways. And then in response, get this, in response to loading forces supported by diet, but loading forces, they develop the tensile aspect of the bone. You know those crunchy bars? Chocolate on the outside, honeycomb in the middle? Well, imagine a crunchy bar with none of the honeycomb. Quite brittle, right? So when the bones are growing fast, they're quite brittle. This is why teenagers in that period of time are faced with a fracture window. They will break lots of bones in and around there for the boys, and in and around there for the girls, because their bones are quite brittle. Worst thing, of course, if you don't keep the kids in sport, the girls in sport after the age of 12, 13, or the boys after the age of 14, 15, they won't develop those nice strong bones. Because where do you think loading forces come from on the skeletal system? Physical activity. And what's more important, varied physical activity. If you just run, you just skate, or you just swim, the loading forces will be very specialized to that particular sport, which means the bone development will respond specifically to that. So you put a different loading that the body is not used to, and you can understand what would happen. This period of time, this stability period through childhood, and remember the growth spurt marks the end of childhood. So there's a period of sensitivity where you're screwed. No more childhood. Only 8 once, only 9 once, only 10 once. You also know that you have less time with girls. So you better do good programming with your girls. You better teach them all the fundamentals, because they're going to hit that growth spurt before the boys. In this period of time, rhythm is set down. Rhythm is extremely important in sport. So how many of you allow music? How many of you encourage them to do music or dance? Even for fun. The rhythm of the slap shot, the rhythm of the glove save, the rhythm of skating, the rhythm even of getting up off your feet or your ass after being dumped. Rhythm is vital for all sport. What about pressure sensitivity? Also laid down probably before the age of 6 or 7. Pressure sensitivity on the skate. Pressure sensitivity to understand how to make a pass. Pressure sensitivity in terms of how to take the velocity off the puck, the so-called soft hands, which of course you can teach not simply by playing hockey. You can learn to throw things around and catch. Soft hands. But it's got to be specific. Ball honky. Lots of different ways to teach if you're a creative coach. Compared to this period of time, which is where we make so many decisions for kids. And yet, this is where all the change is happening. You realize at the top of that peak just here, this is where we have the biggest difference in youngsters between their chronological age and their biological age. Chronological age is where you start the stopwatch of life when they're born, okay, and it just ticks along. Compared to the biological age, which is the one that really matters, and that's to do with the underlying genetic matrix that's been handed down to them from their forefathers, okay? At 14 years of age, chronologically, you could easily have a 48-month biological spread in that single year of birth. So right now, the 2003 born boys are 14 years of age. But you could literally be looking at a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old in that same year of birth. And you're going to try and tell me you're going to be able to sort them out administratively and put them on teams? Crap. What you identify classically are 2 spectrum. The early maturers that you'll say are talented and wonderful, and you'll move them on and you'll give them more coaching and you'll put them in tier A and all this type of stuff, and there's no repechage. And then you have the kids that are behind the back of the bus and you say they're useless. That's what we do with kids. Totally moral. So, the next thing, of course, we recognize all the physicality, but what's going on inside the body? So what you have here is 5 years of age through to 20 years of age, okay? 5 to 20 years of age. On the top side, the front of the brain is the right side of the scan. On the bottom, the top of the scan is the front of the brain. And as the brain is maturing, just like the rest of the body, from the yellows and the greens to the indigos, we can start to see different things. Understand it happens very late. So even though physically they might have finished growing as much as you can see, 16, 17, 18 years of age, there's still a ways to go. And it won't actually be really set down until maybe 22, 23, and particularly this area of the brain, this prefrontal area, so important in fundamental controls, ultimately. Things such as decision-making, risk assessment, dealing with authority, dealing with rules, getting out of bed before 12 o'clock on a Sunday, all this type of stuff. The so-called bane of being a teenager for the adults. But they're hardwired that way. So you may see a kid that's shaving already, but he'll still be a little boy or little girl inside. Still wants to rush home and play with a Lego. But you're judging totally on physicality, not understanding that human development is an entirety, it's a holistic thing. And that may even involve the language that you use to communicate. Whose language? Are you communicating with them, or are you communicating in a one-way torrent from you based on what you think they need to know? So here's a little video of a kid with a ball, not on some pristine, nice surface. This is an urban environment. You'll see him point at the crossbar at one stage. He'll even pull up his pants. Finishes with a very nice smile. He's only 9 years of age. Let me just get this to work somehow. Here we go. Pulls his pants up.
Boys and girls, listen up. You could be anything in the world, and God we trust. An architect, doctor, maybe an actress, but nothing comes easy. It takes much practice. I know I can be what I want to be. If I work hard at it.
Finish with a beautiful smile. And you think he was taught this? He was coached to do that? No, that came through countless hours of play and experimentation. Being challenged by his peer group, perhaps seeing older ones, being certainly shown the odd thing by his coach. But I guarantee his coach, either deliberately or the kid is motivated because it's fun, to have lots of play work. Just like homework in school, but play work. What is the play work you give your kids? I'm not going to see you now for 4 days, so here's a tennis ball. Come back next week and show me exactly what you'd like to do with that tennis ball. Or here's a Swedish practice ball. Show me what you can do with your stick and that next week. Because it's in those countless hours of experimentation, not the few minutes that you have with them on ice each week, that they really, really learn the skills. Let's talk about energy systems, because I wonder about hockey. I know in Canada, at a very young age, we basically play exactly the same rules up until recently on a large surface of ice, and we play 3 periods. They may be scaled slightly down, 15 minutes, but typically the parents like to see 3 20-minute periods. Have you ever seen a bunch of 8-year-olds, third period of 3 20 minutes, what it looks like? It's like watching molasses trickle out of a bottle. They're dead. But I'm going to show you some stuff here about energy systems. Because if I dressed a 5-year-old in hockey equipment, and a 10-year-old, and a 15-year-old, and a 20-year-old, and a 25-year-old, and asked them to rush down the ice and come back, every one of them, and those age groups, produces energy slightly differently. From very, very aerobic on the little kids to, fortunately, the development of the anaerobic glycolytic system solidly by 25. On a scale, remember, fiber type isn't laid down until well after puberty, not the final fiber type. So, This is percentage change. Percentage change. First 2 decades of life. Here's the aerobic system. So this is VO2 max, maximal aerobic power, the amount of oxygen you can take in, transport around the body, and utilize by whatever organ needs it, whether it's muscle, brain, or whatever. So you see the biggest peak of the change in aerobic power. And remember this, nothing says that you can't improve it as an adult. You can, it's just not at the same level, is around 13, 14, 15. Why is that? I just showed you the height graph. So you've got a little kid who suddenly is doing this. So what do you think is happening to the size of the lungs, the blood volume, and the musculature? All going up. So it's no wonder that happens. But of course, if you're trying to play them on, I know, a whole bunch of 20-second shifts and treat them like a bunch of adults as though they're producing energy anaerobically, you're doing them a great disservice. Because you should be training them like endurance athletes. But no, we've got to have a roster of 23 kids on every team. We're going to cut all these other kids, they can't play. Instead of saying, well, why don't we change the rules a little bit, play for less time but longer periods of time and have less kids on each team, maybe only 12 to 13, and have more teams because we're not going to play 60 minutes, we're only going to play 40 minutes, but each kid plays for longer instead of sitting on the bench for X amount of time. But we won't do that because we're adults and we like watching hockey and not understanding these little kids want to have fun and they want to play. And it's borne out by the science. Compared to this, here's anaerobic capacity and blood lactate production. These come on later. This is what the big boys use, supported by the aerobic system. But of course, if you rush for specialization, you're going to do all this amazing world championship level, NHL level, KHL level, specialized off-ice training with a bunch of 12-year-olds. You're behaving immorally, ignorantly, and stupidly. And we've all done it. Here's another one. Classic work by Molina and Bouchard. Okay, some of the greatest pediatric exercise people on the planet, also involved in genetics in the case of Bouchard. Robert Molina is an expert in child and youth development. I chose this because it doesn't involve any skill. All you've got is kids coming in once a year to pull on a steel cable with a tensionometer, okay? They just pull on it, see how much force in kilograms they can generate. And as they age, so this data set is 2 sets, cross-sectionally, just a bunch of 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, so forth, and a group that age over a decade. And they divided them based on X-ray assessment of maturity, okay, which is one of the fundamental ways science determines actual biological age, the age of the skeletal system. So they divided them into early, middle, and late maturers. So first off, you can see they all get to the same place at the end. In fact, there's huge evidence now across multiple fields to show the later developers, and if you look at the steepness of that green line, shoot past the plateau of the early developers, well borne out in the literature. But of course, if you want to win at 14 years of age, you're going to choose that lot. You're going to tell this lot, they suck. Go do tennis. Or take up swimming, or crochet, or something like that. And you won't have them later on. And of course, you should all know that if you truly want to win, there are 3 things that dictate international success at the highest level, one of which is population size. So if you screw up your population by cutting them out early on, tough shit, you're not going to win. The other 2, of course, are money and resources invested in the system and the social, cultural, political significance of sport in that society. Okay? Of course, there are only 2 countries in the world currently that have all 3. United States of America and China, being chased hard, of course, by India when they get their act together, and they will. So, we classically follow that orange line and maybe begrudgingly a little bit of a notice to the light blue line, but we throw away so many early in the system. And there are unintended consequences for hockey across the planet, because whatever happens up here, whenever a decision is made about recruitment in these age groups, the message then goes to the parents and the kids of this age group. And so they start behaving. And if they're not on the fast track, they're going to start getting out of the sport. And if there's a decision made about this age group, then this lot will start behaving in a certain way. So understand, every decision you make, you need to understand the unintended consequences and give them really, really stringent thought. And of course, I'm talking about things like the drafts at various leagues. It will always trickle down negatively. Physical literacy: run, jump, throw, kick, strike, skate, swim, hold your breath. All these type of aspects: agility, balance, coordination. What are these things as you come through to about the age of 13, 14, 15? That's why I ask you, what does a 13, 14, 15-year-old boy or girl look like? What should they be able to do athletically? And then in the sport-specific component of hockey, what should they be able to do? Because here's the irony for you. You all think you're playing a team game, which of course you are. But unfortunately, it's all based on individual skills. And the team is only as good as its weakest link. So if someone can't skate, they can't handle the puck, they can't turn in both directions, they can't think for themselves, you're kind of hooped. So at the end of the day, you need to raise the bar on every child. Every child. Classic shot of chronological age versus biological age. These boys are all 14. Who do you think's winning right now? Well, look at that guy on the right. He looks like Adonis. The little kid on the left, he can't even get on the pommel horse. He's getting the message that he sucks. Worse still, he gets in the car to go home with his parents. That awful drive home. Mother's driving along. I'm spending $400 a month on you for gymnastics. You suck. Understand this, the basic rule. By all means, in any period of time, before you ever teach them something, by all means, have some kind of pretest to assess where they are, and some kind of assessment. Then you put them through the intervention, and then you have the post-assessment. School understands that. But they don't cut anyone from doing the intervention in the first place, do they? The only important thing you need to understand is this, really, because dependent on what the intervention was, there may be some residual fatigue if you test immediately after doing this. So you might want some kind of recovery period before the final exam. Everyone understands that. So do you even understand how to sort of gradually just package your programming? This is just classic basic 101 planning and periodization. Periodization basically being good time management. How much time do you have? What are you trying to do? Which age group? Understand this. Pretty weird for us. And worse still when you're playing league games. But understand the difference between the pros and the upper age groups and the beginning age groups and the middle age groups. We may structure our competition based on whatever the hell is going on in the seniors. So we play these lengthy seasons. But kids are learning. And you all know that your teams get better over the course of the season. That's completely different than the pros. They've got to come out of the gate flying hard when you're playing in the NHL or the KHL or whatever the performance league might be compared to the kids. So one of the key things you want to understand for youngsters is you want to put the final exam as late as possible in the year, after they've learned something. So what does the calendar for competition look like for 6-year-olds through to 15-year-olds? It certainly should look a lot different than it does once you go into the older age groups, into the professional leagues, because it's a completely different ball of wax. What you're trying to do with the 6-year-olds to the 15-year-olds is simply get better year on year, because that's your job. Not to win some meaningless league, because it's all meaningless. I'm being ruthless with you. There are 3 places on a World Championship or Olympic podium. There is 1 winner of the Stanley Cup. 3 places on an Olympic podium, not 7 billion. If there were 7 billion, we could all do it. But there's 3. And 1 winner of the Stanley Cup. So questions are key to you. Armed with the information I've thrown at you very quickly, you need to ask questions about what the hell you're doing. You need to understand that dashboard concept. What is the dashboard for the 8-year-old versus the 12-year-old versus the 16-year-old versus the 20-year-old versus the 24-year-old, because they are different, fundamentally different. And your job as the coach of 8-year-olds is to get them ready for the next phase of their life, on and off the ice. You need to think about models like this. Everyone starts off as a participant. They then may gradually, if they get a bit better, move into, and they want to have some fun, play recreationally competitive. As they get better, and now they're moving to older age groups, now getting into some kind of performance development. This is not elite. The only thing that should be elite or high performance in performance development is the quality of instruction. So you can definitely be a world-class coach, an instructor of 8-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 16-year-olds. But they are not world-class performers. They're kids. And then finally you get towards high-performance sport. But that's reserved for the few from the many. Understand the concept of performance envelopes. KPI, key performance indicator. Okay, comes back to some of the stuff Tom talked about. This is time in years along the bottom, or training age. Training age. Okay, here's whatever is the world level currently. And of course, it's a nice smooth curve, but that's not reality. Okay, this might be an early mature that happens to actually get to world level compared to the latest of the late that could possibly get there. Okay? The problem down at the bottom is there's massive variation down at the bottom, both in terms of the magnitude of performance and the time over which it could be displayed. But gradually over time, there's a homogeneity of the few that get there. Remember, there's lots of kids. All the kids are here. But the vast majority are going to head off here. They're not going to follow within this envelope up to here. Is that understood? This is why tiering can be good, because all your tiering streams are within these envelopes. You might have the tier A, the top part of the curve is your tier A's, and then your whatever tier, if you use numbers, tier 1, then down to tier 4, whatever it might be. The key thing is, do you have repercharge? Do you have the ability to interchange as they grow? And is there an assessment process for that? Is that clear? The other challenge that you need to understand is, this is hockey when I first came to Canada 25 years ago, okay? The Oilers just won their last Stanley Cup, 1990, okay? So 26. But here's hockey now. Here's hockey now. Much faster game, much more athletic, less time, less space. Nothing stands still. You may get romantic about it. And here's the challenge for you. If you understand this concept, you need to know that if you're coaching 8-year-olds right now, okay, and you think that in your pocket of those 8-year-olds, there are kids that are going to go to the world level, you're coaching them for a game that you don't know, that doesn't exist yet. Worse still, you will likely gravitate to coach them a game that you learnt 20 years ago when you were playing. So there's 2 double whammies for you. You're coaching them for a game that's now 20 years beyond where you are right now, but you're coaching them in a way that was 20 years ago. So there's a 40-year age group for what you are actually teaching them. So you need an open mind. Right back to the start. That's tough. And you need to educate those parents because they've got even less of a memory than you. You're going to have to hit the hazard warning light every so often. You're going to have to deal with these parents, okay, in the most effective way. Information with great support because the literature is there. They're getting bombarded with misinformation, year-round hockey, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But that's unfortunate. People are going to take pot shots at you. Age group coach, just as Tom said, you've got to do the right thing in your town, your village, okay? So you can sleep at night, not be immoral, okay? You've got to find strategies to come with that. People, programs, and places. Great people designing great programs. You don't need Taj Mahal places all the time. As I said, we could teach everything to do with tactics in this room or in a car park. Preserve your precious ice time. So understand that. I get fed up with them and say, oh, we need more ice time. No, you don't. There's tons of it. Use it more effectively. Understand that aspect. Understand the dashboard concept very clearly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, first, but there should be a question, or shouldn't be questions, but one I have, because of when the sound went off and stuff. I think you wanted to say that even in the lack of testosterone, you still can strength train. Is that what you want to say? Because that's important to me, because that's a big mistake people make.
Yeah, I didn't want you to misinterpret the testosterone line. Of course you can do strength training, but kids are getting stronger because of that neural curve. They're learning how to utilize what they have. They're learning the movement. And of course, they're growing anyway, so there's an overload from just normally growing a little bit, which is quite different than actually being able to lay down more muscle mass, which will only happen to a great extent once testosterone comes on board, okay? Which is fairly late in that growth spurt. Kids look stringy and beanie, right, initially when they're growing. The muscle mass comes on later. This is why even in the NHL, you see these young boys recruited, the few, because there's very few getting in at 18, 19 years of age. The media and parents will think about that, but do you know really, to play 5 games in the NHL, do you know how old they are? 5 games, go and look at the stats, 23 years of age. They're not 19. And you see them fill out. 21, 22, 23, 24, and you suddenly see these men start to be produced. Now, as an exercise physiologist to do with elite sport, I don't even see a stable, high-performance profile in men until 24, 25, 26, 27, and in females maybe a touch younger, 22, 23, 24, 25. Not 15, 16, 17. There are the few phenoms, but they're phenoms for a reason. So strength training you can definitely do, but it's neural, not simply structural.